left on the prairie during the longest night of the year. A Lakota chief was her only fire. The horse was dead by the time I found her. That's where I'll start, because that horse, a bay mare, one white sock on the left foreleg, belly already stiffening in the cold, told me everything I needed to know about the kind of men who'd left this woman in the snow. They'd let the animal run until her heart quit. That's what they were. That's the size of it. I almost didn't see the woman. She was in the draw below the cutbank, down in the dark where the wind doesn't reach, and the snow had come over her boots to the knee. She wasn't moving when I came down off my horse. I stood there a moment and listened. The plains go so quiet in that particular cold, a cold that has weight to it that presses, and then I heard it. Slow breath, just barely, enough. My name is not easy for a white tongue, so I won't put it here the way most men would try to write it. My people called me Charging Elk. I was 44 winters that year, chief of a band that wintered near the White River Breaks, and I was riding alone because I'd gone out to check the east line of our camp after two young men reported seeing tracks they couldn't account for. I found the tracks. I found more than I expected. I got her up over my horse, and I rode back to camp. That's the plain version of it. The real version takes all night to tell. I had two wives once. The first one died young, fever, a bad summer on the reservation. The second one left not for another man, just left, said I was cold and far away, said the weight of leading had taken whatever warmth I'd had. She wasn't wrong. I didn't hold it against her. Some men are rivers and some are stone, and by 40 I knew which one I was. My daughters were grown, scattered. My sons respected me more than they loved me, which is the chief's bargain. You take it. I say all that so you understand the camp I was riding back to. A fire, 3 lodges of my closest people, and me, Charging Elk, which meant a man who kept the firewood stacked and the decisions clear, and who hadn't been looked at softly by anyone in a long time. Years. That kind of cold gets inside the lodgepoles. You stop noticing it. I lay her down near the fire in my own lodge. I didn't think much about that choice. The other lodges had children. This one had only me and room to work. She came around slow. Her hands were the worst of it, the fingers gone to the color of candle tallow, and when they started to feel again, she made a sound I won't try to describe except to say that I have heard men take arrows and not make that sound. I worked her fingers in mine, slow and steady, the way you work cold from a horse's legs. Friction and patience. Not much else you can do. She opened her eyes eventually. Dark eyes. I expected fear. They always give you fear first, the white settlers, even the decent ones, and I braced for it. Instead she looked at me, and then at the fire, and then back at me, and what came across her face was something nearer to relief than anything else. Like a thing released. She said, in a voice not much bigger than the creak of the lodge skins, "I thought I was going to die out there." I said, "You were." She almost laughed at that, almost. Her name was Clara Haas. She told me this once her voice came back, which took a while. German name, she said. Her father had come over in 48, settled in Iowa, pushed west. She was 31. A widow, she said, and then stopped and looked at the fire for a long beat before saying it again, like she was still getting used to the word. Her husband, Martin, had died in October. Fever. She'd been trying to get to her brother-in-law's place near the Niobrara with 2 hired men, and what remained of her household goods on a wagon. The men, she said. She didn't finish. I waited. They said they'd seen the weather coming, and they needed to ride ahead for supplies, and they'd be back by nightfall. I watched her. That was 3 days ago, she said. She looked at her hands, which were wrapped in a blanket I'd traded for the summer before, red wool with a yellow stripe. She looked at those hands for a long time. I said, "The horse." She nodded. I tried to ride. She ran. I don't know, she must have felt something. She just ran and I couldn't stop her, and then she fell and I couldn't get her up, and there was nothing around me anywhere. She stopped, breathed. I started walking, and then I couldn't walk, and I went down in that cut to get out of the wind, and I thought, This is where they'll find me in the spring. I looked at her hands again, the color coming back into them now, pink and painful. She hadn't cried yet. I noticed that. Some people, you can see them decide not to. She was one of those. You are warm enough now, I said. Not a question exactly. Yes, she looked at me directly. Thank you. The winter solstice on the northern plains is not a poetic thing. It is a practical emergency. The sun is up perhaps 7 hours, and those hours are low and pale and cold. And then the dark comes down like a lid and the temperature drops in a way that is hard to explain to someone who hasn't felt it, not just cold but hostile, like the land itself has decided against you. My people have songs for this night. We have protocols. We don't romanticize it. I sat across the fire from Clara Haas for most of that first night, and I kept the fire fed, and I kept watch, and I thought about the 2 hired men. Not with anger exactly. Anger is a young man's fuel, and I had moved past it. I thought about them the way I thought about a specific kind of rot, a thing that happens when the structure goes wrong, when a man discovers under pressure that he is smaller than he told himself he was. Those men had been a size in their own minds, and then the cold came and they found their real size. It happens. The plains have a way of showing you. She slept. I watched the fire. Around what I judged to be the middle of the night, you learn to read it, the way the cold deepens, the particular silence. She woke and sat up and for a moment looked wild, the way people do when they forget where they are. Then she saw the fire and me, and she settled. Is there water? She said. I gave her the bladder bag. She drank carefully like she was rationing herself, even though there was plenty. How long until morning? She asked. Long, I said, the longest night of the year. She absorbed this, pulled the blanket tighter. Do your people, is there something you do? A ceremony. I told her yes, there is ceremony. I told her what it is, not the details that aren't mine to share with a stranger, but the shape of it, that we mark the dark as the dark, call it what it is, and we make fire against it, and we tell the stories of men and women who endured worse and came through. We don't pretend the night is short. We sit in it together and we make it mean something by enduring it together. She was quiet for a while after that. Then she said, the men who left me, do you know the kind? I said, I know the kind. Have you dealt with them before? Men who, she searched for the word, unmake themselves when it gets hard. I thought about this. About all the years of dealing with men who came onto our land making themselves large, and then the way they got small when the land answered back. About treaty men who shook your hand with both of theirs and then sent the paper writers. About the particular sourness of men who discover their own cowardice and go mean about it, because going mean is easier than going honest. Yes, I said. What do you do with them? I wait, I said. The plains teach everything eventually. You don't have to hurry it. She looked at me in the firelight. Looked at me the way very few people did, not with the quick assessment they give a chief, not with the wariness they give an Indian, but just looked, like she was reading something and was in no hurry to put the page down. That's a kind of justice, she said. It's a kind of patience, I said, not always the same thing. I should tell you about the cold that second day, because it matters to understanding what came after. It was the kind of cold that kills the unprepared in an hour. I know people say that about cold, and usually they're being dramatic, but in the breaks of the White River in December, after the front that came through the night before, no. Not dramatic. Factual. The temperature was somewhere that your spit freezes before it hits the ground, and your horse's breath makes a cloud you can see for 50 yards. Clara Haas was not unprepared, because I was prepared for her. I had dry moccasins that had belonged to my second wife, and had been sitting in a bundle at the back of the lodge for 2 years. They fit poorly, but they fit. I had a heavy elk hide robe that I put over her shoulders before she took 2 steps out to relieve herself, because you don't joke with that kind of cold. I had food, pemmican, dried service berries, a little of the jerked elk from the fall, and I fed her regularly. Not big meals, just steady fuel, because the body burning itself to stay warm is a furnace that needs constant loading. She accepted all of it without embarrassment and without excessive gratitude either, which I respected. Some people, when you help them, make a performance of the debt. They go shy or they go theatrical, and it puts a wrong thing in the air between you. Clara Haas took what she needed and gave back clear-eyed attention and the occasional dry remark, and it was easier than I'd expected to have another person in my lodge. On the second morning, I went out to check my horses, and when I came back, she had moved my fire tools around and rebuilt the fire to a better configuration. Not more wood, just arranged different. The kind of change someone makes when they've grown up thinking about heat all their lives. When I looked at it, she said, matter-of-factly, "My father built a better fire than anyone I ever knew." He said the mistake most people make is they want the fire to be big when what they want is for the fire to last. I looked at her rebuild. She'd done it right. "Your father was a practical man," I said. "He was," she said then. "Martin, my husband, he learned it eventually. Martin was a city man, came from Cincinnati. It took him 4 winters to build a fire worth looking at." She said this with a kind of fond impatience, the way you remember someone's shortcomings when the shortcomings no longer matter. "The last winter he got it right. I told him so. He was proud about it for a week." She looked at the fire. "He was a good man," she said. "Bad heart, as it turned out. You can't know that about a man until the heart tells you." I sat down and we ate. 2 of my men came to the lodge on the afternoon of the second day, Gray Hawk and his younger brother, whose name I will translate as Standing in Rain. They were checking on me because I'd been gone from the main camp activities, which wasn't like me. I saw their eyes go to Clara immediately when they came in, and I watched them adjust their faces, and then I watched them look at me to read how to hold this. I said in Lakota, "She was left in the snow. We're keeping her until the weather breaks." Gray Hawk said, also in Lakota carefully, "Are you certain that's the choice you want to make, Uncle?" I said I already made it. Standing in Rain, who was younger and sometimes let things out that should have stayed in, said, "The white men from the Niobrara post aren't going to like hearing we have one of their women in camp." I said they're welcome to come collect her in this weather. I'll watch them try. Standing in Rain looked at Clara, then back at me, and then he did something I hadn't seen him do in a while. He grinned. Just briefly. Clara had been sitting with her hands in her lap during all of this, watching us talk. She knew we were talking about her. She didn't flinch from it. When the men left, she said, "You told them you found me in the snow?" I said yes. "And they're uncertain about me being here?" "They are cautious men," I said. "It's a trait I selected for." She almost smiled at that too. She had this way of almost smiling. You could see it arrive at the edge of her mouth and stop there, like she was making a decision about whether to let it all the way through. "I understand their concern," she said. "I'm a disruption." "You are a guest," I said. "The difference matters." She looked at me for a moment, and then the almost smile went all the way through. It changed her face considerably. I hadn't been prepared for it. The third day the cold broke, not warmly. It never goes warm all at once out there. It just steps back from savage to merely brutal, and you take that as the gift it is. I was able to get out and range further, check tracks, look for sign of those hired men. I found where they'd made a cold camp about 3 miles east of Fire Ring. 2 horses hobbled, the ashes of a fire that had burned down days ago. They'd moved on north. I tracked them another 2 miles and then let it go. They weren't coming back. When I returned, Clara had done something that surprised me. She had gone through the lodge looking at things, not touching, just looking, the way a careful person examines a space they're living in, and she had found on my backrest a carved antler figure I had made years ago, a small elk. Poor work, honestly. My hands were better suited to other things. But I'd made it during a winter when I had nothing to do with myself and too much to think about, and it had stayed. She was holding it when I came in, very carefully, and she looked up immediately and put it back where she'd found it. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have touched it." "It's all right," I said. "It isn't sacred." "It's beautiful," she said. I looked at the thing, crooked forelegs, neck too long. "It isn't that either," I said. She picked it up again, slower this time, with my permission understood. She turned it. "My husband carved. Birds, mostly. He liked birds. Couldn't work a field to save his life, but give the man a knife and a piece of wood and he'd make you something that looked like it was about to lift off the table." She set the elk down. "I left all of it. When I left the homestead, I couldn't carry much, and I told myself the things didn't matter. The things were just things." She was quiet. "They weren't just things," she said. I said nothing because there was nothing to say to that. Sometimes the most honest response to a true thing is silence. After a while she looked up. "Do you have family?" I told her. "The daughters, the sons, the band. The wives, both of them, in the flat way you tell it when you've had time to make your peace." She listened the way she did most things, fully, without moving much. Like stillness was how she paid attention. "And you're alone," she said, not a question. "I am the chief," I said. "That isn't an answer," she said. I looked at her. Nobody had said a thing like that to me in a long time. Not pushed back on my sideways answers, the way you do when you're talking to someone you've decided to take seriously. "No," I said after a moment, "it isn't. On the fourth night, I'm going to tell you about something I haven't told many people." We'd eaten and the fire was good and the wind had gone mostly quiet outside. One of those strange windless pockets you get sometimes in a December night, like the plains are catching their breath. Clara had been telling me about Iowa, about her father's place, about winters there that she said were cold, but not like this cold, not this kind. And then she asked me, "What do you do on the longest night that you're allowed to say?" I thought about it for a while, and then I told her. I told her about the songs, not the songs themselves, but what they're for, that they're for naming the dark so the dark doesn't have more power than it deserves. I told her about the old story my grandmother told me, of the woman who sat in the cold for 4 days and 4 nights to pray for her dying son, and how on the 4th night the cold didn't kill her, not because the cold turned kind, but because she had become, by then, something the cold couldn't find purchase on, something that had gone through enough. I don't know why I told her that story. I hadn't thought of it in years. It came up the way those things do. You open a door in yourself you'd forgotten was there. Clara sat very still through it. The fire was low. I leaned and put another piece on without breaking the telling. And when I finished, she said, "I thought I was going to die out there. 3 days ago, I was absolutely certain I was going to die." "You weren't far from it," I said. "I know." She pressed her hands together, the healed hands, and held them that way. "I've been thinking about what it felt like, to be that certain. And I think I know what you mean about naming the dark. Because out there in that cut, the dark wasn't the cold or the wind or even the dying. The dark it was the idea that I didn't matter enough for anyone to come." The fire settled, a log shifted. "And then you came," she said, "and the dark got smaller." I looked at the fire. I could feel her looking at me, but I kept my eyes on the fire for a moment, because there was something happening in my chest that I wasn't ready to put a face to yet. "I would have come for anyone," I said, honest. "I know," she said, "that's what I mean. I want to be careful here about what I tell you and what I don't, because this part of the story gets misread easy. People hear a man and a woman alone in a lodge for 5 days and nights, and they think they know what they're hearing. I'm going to tell it plain. Nothing happened that those people imagine. What happened was this. 2 people who had both been alone longer than was healthy for either of them found that the other one was good company. That's a rarer thing than it sounds. It's the kind of thing you stop expecting somewhere in your 40s if you're honest about it. She made me laugh on the 4th day. I didn't expect that either. It was about something small. I was trying to explain why a particular fire-starting method she'd heard of was wrong, and I was doing it in that way I have, which is methodical, and she listened with great seriousness and then said, "You sound like my father when he was explaining something obvious." And her delivery was so exact, she even had the same little chin lift he must have had, that I laughed. Not a polite sound. The real thing. I heard it come out of me like something unused. She looked pleased in a quiet way, like she'd found out something she'd been wondering about. After that, things were easier. She helped where she could, which was mostly in not needing help where she didn't need it. She was practical and unsentimental about what she could and couldn't do, and she didn't apologize for limitations or make performances of capability. She just did the actual thing or didn't, and that's the kind of person who fits easy in a working camp. My men adjusted. Standing in rain started leaving firewood near the lodge entrance without being asked, which in his language meant he decided she was all right. Gray Hawk never directly warmed to her, but he stopped looking like a man waiting for disaster, which was, from Gray Hawk, approximately affection. On the afternoon of the 5th day, the weather cleared enough that I could see the Niobrara country to the north, and I knew we were coming to the end of things. I started thinking about how to get her there. She must have been thinking the same thing, because that evening she said, "If the weather holds, I could probably try to travel in a day or two." "I'll take you," I said. She looked up from what she was doing. She'd been working on a tear in the red and yellow blanket. She'd asked for something to mend it with, and I'd given her sinew and a bone needle. She looked up over the blanket. "You don't have to do that," she said. "It's a 2-day ride in good weather," I said. "In this weather it's 3. You don't know the trail." "I could follow the river." "You could follow the river into trouble," I said. "There are places on this river that look like crossings and aren't. You'd be in the water before you knew it." She looked at me steadily. "You have a camp to run." "I have men who can run the camp for 3 days," I said. There was a pause. "All right," she said, and went back to the mending. We left on the morning of the 7th day, after I'd found her. I had 2 horses. I put her on the better one, a roan gelding, steady in cold, good feet. I took my dun. We rode mostly quiet because cold riding doesn't invite talk. The breath comes out of you in clouds, and you need to keep your face down and your collar up, and talk means uncovering your face. But at noon on the 1st day, we came to the top of a long ridge, and the sun was out, actually out, low and pale but present, and we stopped to let the horses blow. And below us the plains opened up for 50 miles in every direction, and the snow on them was so white, and the sky above was a blue so cold and clear it looked like something cut from glass. And Clara said, from right beside me, "God." Not a prayer, just that word pushed out of her, like the country had hit her in the chest. I know that feeling. I have lived here all my life, and it still does it to me sometimes when the light is like that, takes you by surprise with its size. We rode on. That night we made a cold camp in the lee of a limestone bluff I know, where the rock holds some heat and the overhang keeps the wind off. I made a fire and she helped, and we ate what I'd packed, and we sat close to the fire because at night in December on those plains, you sit as close to the fire as you can and you don't be precious about proximity. Shoulders almost touching. She said, "What will you do when you get back?" I thought about this genuinely. "The same things," I said. "Winter work, there's always winter work. And then spring." "Spring, yes. The band moves. There's a place we go in late spring on the good river, the cottonwoods come in and there's good grass and the fishing is good." I thought about it. "It's my favorite time of year." "And you'll go alone?" I looked at the fire. I didn't answer right away. "Most likely," I said. She turned her head and looked at me from close range. The fire was between us and slightly to the left, and the light on her face was gold and low, and she wasn't looking at me the way people look at a chief or at a man they're deciding about or even at a man they're grateful to. She was looking at me like you look at something that has been there all along, and you only now know what it is. She said, "You are the most able man I have ever been in the company of." I thought about deflecting this, saying something sideways. I didn't. "I've been called stubborn and cold and difficult," I said, "more often than able." "I know," she said. I can see where they'd get to that. Her mouth did the almost smile thing, but they'd be looking at the wrong part. We reached the Niobrara country on the afternoon of the second day. Her brother-in-law's name was Edmund Haas, a heavy-set man with a red beard who came out of his sod house in the cold and stood staring at us riding in and then at Clara, and then at me, with an expression on his face that was trying to be several things at once and wasn't quite managing any of them. Clara dismounted. She said to Edmund, "I'll explain everything in a moment. First." She came to my horse's side and looked up at me. She wasn't a small woman, but I am tall on a horse, and she looked up without any awkwardness about it. "I'll carry the debt," she said. "There isn't one," I said. Standard thing to say. "There is," she said, "and I know you don't want me to keep talking about it, so I won't. But I want you to know," and here she reached up and put both her hands, her mended hands, her hands I'd worked the cold out of on the longest night of the year, around my right hand where it held the rein. Held it for a moment, not soft, solid, like someone who meant it. "I know what you are," she said, "the whole of it, and it's worth knowing." I looked down at her. She held my hand one more moment and then let it go and stepped back, and that was that. Edmund said something. I don't remember what. I turned my horse and started back the way I'd come. That was 30 years ago, near enough. I'll tell you the rest quick, because it isn't complicated. Clara Haas was at Edmund's place for 2 more years. She wrote to me through a trader who moved between the Niobrara settlements and the river country, not long letters. She wasn't given to long letters but regular, practical letters. What the winter was like there. What she'd learned about the soil. A question or two about things she was curious about. I wrote back in the same register, which is to say, not sentimentally but honestly. In the 3rd year she wrote that she was thinking about coming back to the White River country. There was, she said, good land that nobody had broken yet on the south side of the breaks, and she thought she might like to try it. She did. She built something modest first, and then less modest, and she turned out to be right about the land. Turned out she was right about several things she'd looked at and decided on, which I could have told anybody who asked, if they'd thought to ask. I used to ride by. Then I used to stop. Then there was a chair on her porch that had become, over some period of time I couldn't pin down exactly, my chair. I am 74 years old. My hair has been white for a decade. My knees are a catalog of bad decisions made on horseback. The band I led through those years is changed, some dead, some scattered. The young ones pulled between worlds in ways that keep me awake some nights. And there is still, when the fall comes and the cold starts to bite back into the mornings, a woman who puts a second cup on the table, who builds the fire better than I could, who looks at me across that fire, a white woman, a widow, a woman who has held this country in her hands and squeezed it into something worth having, and who looks at me the way she looked at me on that cold ridge the day the sun came out, like I am a thing worth seeing. Not what I was back when I could ride all day and make the young men nervous. What I am now. This, the creases, the white hair, the quiet, the man who has endured enough to know what matters. On the longest night of the year we still sit up. We make the fire good and we sit in it together and I tell the old stories and she listens the way she's always listened. Fully, completely still, like stillness is how she pays attention. And the dark stays the right size. That's all.